What's up, Zach here, and today I've got the all-new Way of Wade 11, and you know, from what these things looked like on my phone, my tablet, computer, TV, to what they actually looked and felt like once I got them in hand was quite different, and I'll tell you what, they're nuts. So let's get into them. And thanks to Way of Wade for sending me a pair of these over to check out. However, as always, this video is not sponsored, and all opinions, good, bad, and indifferent, are all my own. Now, number one, in the uppers, they're at the same time more substantial and yet more flexible than they appeared. And it was weird because number one, the ankle collar on these things, right, is super padded, and it is actually a little bit more flexible than you think they're going to be when you tie them down. Now, number one, the lace eyelets a little bit more distal than that. They're all outrigger lace eyelets, but the anchors that make the lace eyelets are really chunky and thick. They're super substantial. They go all the way into the strobe board underneath the gust of the tongue. So the lockdown on these is really tremendous in the midfoot. It does take a little while for that lace line to break in, for the ankle collar to break in, because of this giant flowering here with the Way of Wade logo, which we'll talk about in a second. But once that does break in, the heel slippage on these is really zero, right? It goes about mild to moderate at first, and then it's just none once you break the shoe in. Now, what I noticed also is, and what everyone else is going to notice about them, is that this tongue is super porous. I mean, the perforations on this thing are absolutely insane, and you get a ton of airflow, but then you also get a lot of this bead padding, right? You get padding in these individual line segments, right? So the tongue still bends, but you also get a lot of padding when you're really in extreme dorsiflexion in this shoe. So even though the last eyelet of the lace line is pretty far back, so the laces have a pretty far area to traverse, you're not getting, you know, all that neuritis or that real, you know, irritating pain from tight laces, which is a really nice addition. You know, this tongue really does protect, you know, the front part of your ankle, even, you know, the more high ankle as well. But in contrast to the super perforated tongue, you can see right through it, the rest of the uppers are paneled with this leatherette material and then foam that comes over it and this plastic piece here. But, you know, the rest of the uppers, I mean, there's no heat or moisture getting out of any of it. The interesting thing is, on the breathability test, these things still only heated up 111.4 degrees, which obviously is not the most breathable shoe I've ever seen this year, but for how much paneling and just how much solid material is on the uppers, that tongue, because the pores are so big, right? It's not like that micro mesh, right? It's not like those TPU meshing where, you know, air finds its way out somehow. You know, you look at the breathability mapping on this, I mean, fog is just blowing out of this thing like crazy. So even though you're getting really substantial material in these uppers, there is still a lot of air and moisture exchange going on, which I think they threaded that needle pretty well. And honestly, it's not that hard to do. You just, you know, you put some thick padding in the tongue and, you know, poke holes through it. Interesting thing is tying that all together. If you look at the heel counter, you've got this external heel counter that starts on the medial heel, wraps around, you know, makes this giant Way of Wade symbol, and then goes out here into the midfoot, right? It kind of, you know, just kind of splashes out. Now, this is pretty flexible, right? This is very flexible TPU material. It's not rigid, and it relies on its surface area to create more stability. It's just such a big piece of material. Now, there's also an internal heel counter in here. It is not the stiffest thing on the planet, so it does allow a little bit more flexibility in the heel. And so, yes, there is a lot of containment from this giant piece, but because the heel counter doesn't have that super stiff internal heel counter as well, the ankle on these actually does move quite a bit. So the stability in the midfoot and the forefoot, I mean, you're not moving. This thing is containing you like crazy, but in the rear foot, you still do get quite a bit of motion. Now, the flange on these things, you can see it from the top. It's made of a foam as well as the outsole tread. It is very substantial, so it is kind of hard to roll these things over, but do not expect these things to be the Way of Wade 10 in terms of how stiff the rear foot was and just how containing it was. These do allow quite a bit more motion. Once you break them in, once you seat in the shoe a little bit more, it actually feels very good. It feels very nimble, but like I said, get ready for this to feel a little bit more flowing, a little bit more like the 8083 Ultra V2 versus the old Way of Wade 10. If you look at this on the upper durability test, 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper. Now, right here on the medial side of the toe box, it actually is padded more underneath of it. It's not thin like the rest of it. And so the burr does get through the top layer of this. It does not get through the padding of it. And you do get foam that comes up, you know, a little bit over the top. The outsole tread kind of rides out almost like a hovercraft would. So it's actually kind of hard to drag the top of these. You're gonna wear down the foam before you wear down the uppers. These are definitely in the uppers not meant to be dragging or sliding on anything gritty. And getting into the midsole teardown of the 11s, I'll preface this by saying this was one of the better feeling shoes underfoot I've had on in recent memory. And not necessarily due to the materials, but how the materials are used. So number one, you get a full bed of thermoplastic foam or PEBA-based foam. Then you also get a sandwiched carbon fiber shank that is full length, right? But it's broken up in the heel as well as in the forefoot, for more forgiveness on your metatarsal heads, and actually allows the shoe to bend. Now the thing about these that produces such a great feeling of cradling in the arch and just stoutness in the arch is not necessarily the thermoplastic foam, it's not the carbon fiber shank, it's the fact that the heel height and the arch height are similar. This shank is full length, right? So the heel is still stable, but then you get the forgiveness under the heel, and then that super long carbon fiber goes all the way to right where your proximal metatarsals are. So then when the shoe starts diving down into the forefoot, it is cradling your longitudinal arch, which is what makes up the ball of your foot eventually. And so that gives such a feeling of mechanical advantage to your arch going all the way down that distal, what we call that medial column of your foot, riding down the metatarsals eventually into the ball of your foot. A lot of shoes sometimes only give arch support kind of in the rear of the arch, whereas it's in the front of the arch a lot of the times that you're gonna get the most benefit. And that's what these things do best, I think. It's just basically the geometry of the midsole that makes them feel so good and cradling underfoot. Yeah, obviously you got this full-length sandwich shank that's tremendous. It gives such structure to the shoe. But if you look at this shoe, it's still, it still does bend in the forefoot, right at the metatarsal phalangeal joint. So, you can definitely feel it's wanting to spring back when you're doing that. It's enough to give you that forgiveness that it's not gonna feel stiff on there, but then it also has enough memory, right, that it wants to push back. Now, if you look at this on the bounce height test, got 47 centimeters in the heel and then 48 in the forefoot. This thing is just cooking when it comes to the bounce height on this, and you can definitely feel it underfoot. Yeah, there's thermoplastics under there, and that's great, they're super bouncy, but having that shank that is connected throughout the entire shoe allows just so much of a diving board effect, just allows so much bounce. Getting into the outsole tread, this was the biggest question mark I had heading into this review. On the right side of the shoe, it is the Way of Wade logo. And then going into the midfoot and rear foot, you almost have this figurine type pattern, and then it just kind of flowers out from there. And then on the right side of the shoe, it's more of a portrait pattern in the forefoot. Then same thing, the rear foot is the same as on the right side of the shoe. So it's mainly the forefoot that's different between the two shoes. Now, the one thing that I was concerned about is that the tread is so thin. However, I also had that concern on the Leaning Gamma and on the Leaning JB2, and those things blew me away. You look at these things on the grip test ramp, they didn't slip till 46 degrees. And even then I kind of left it up a little bit because it wasn't wanting to move too much. A lot of times once the shoe slips, it really starts slipping. These ones kept wanting to grab traction on the way down, which I thought was interesting. On the viewing box over there, not a lot of individual rubber movement because the tread depth is so thin. It's barely a millimeter in most spots. So these things really rely on the compound of rubber. Now that compound of rubber only comes in at 11.5 on the durometer. However, if you look at the outsole durability test on them, 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper, not even a millimeter of damage on these. This is that rubber that Way of Wade and Li Ning has been coming out with that's number one, soft, but number two, really durable. The problem is that the tread depth is so low. So, I wouldn't be taking these on outdoor courts. On indoor courts, they're gonna last a lot longer than you think they're going to, especially for how soft the rubber is. But we've seen this with these new rubbers that are coming out from Li Ning and Way of Wade that, yeah, they're soft, but they are really durable. And that allows them to not only get the tread depth really low so that the shoe feels more nimble, but also it doesn't matter what the tread pattern is on these really, because it's more the compound of rubber that's producing the grip, not necessarily the orientation of the individual lines of rubber. What I noticed on these is that they were just super nimble, but also super gripping, even after they picked up dust. Any tread that's super tacky is gonna pick up dust. These were no different. But it did not matter. I did not have to wipe these down ever. And I noticed, I looked at them, they were picking up dust, like, all right, let's keep going. Still had no lack of traction. I even noticed when I was coming across the 3-point line trying to stop. These are like the JB2, right? Once the shoe stops, this shoe stops. The one thing about these that I like though is because that tread depth is so low, more of a flat pattern. They're also very nimble. They're not sticking to the ground like, you know, some really tacky shoes. You feel like at times, you know, the shoe's gonna stop and you're gonna roll over them. Whereas these, because that flange is so wide, it's made of that carrier foam, you really do kind of sink into that flange. So there is some forgiveness on these, and they're also very nimble underfoot. It's just that, yeah, you can take them outdoors. It's just that you're gonna ruin all the best parts of these. So to me, I'd probably just keep these on indoor courts. But even though they are two different patterns on the two shoes, I really did not notice any difference between the traction of both of them, and the traction of both shoes was tremendous. And speaking of that traction, look at these on the speed ratio. No surprise, they came in at a 3.2, shank score of 0.3, bumps these things up to a 3.5. I think that's right where they belong. These things are lightning quick. And the thing is, it's not necessarily, once again, it's not just the thermoplastics and the carbon fiber, it's the fact they're so light for all that they give you in the shoe, right? I mean, they're under 15 ounces for a men's size 11 shoe. So they're, you know, they pack a lot into them, but they're also very light feeling shoes. You pick them up. That was the first thing I noticed. Pick them up out of the box, I'm thinking, where's the rest of the shoe? I mean, these things are incredibly light feeling, and they're incredibly bottom light feeling. It's just that unlike some other shoes that are very bottom light feeling, really easy flowing shoes, they don't feel stable at all. Whereas in these, once you break in the lace line, once you break in the heel counter, they feel like they have stability in spades. Now getting into the fit of the Way of Weight 11, these things have a 9-degree inflare, which isn't too bad. They don't have to be, you know, super inflared because the shoe isn't all that heavy and encumbering, so you don't need to have as much of an inflare to make them feel like, you know, they transition step easy. In terms of length, come in pretty true, 28.7 centimeters for men's size 11, but in terms of width, they are a few millimeters narrower than the Way of Weight 10. They came in at 9.3 versus 9.5 centimeters on the 10s. So, you know, a narrow medium foot, you just go true to size. A 2E, to me, you can break them in true to size. They break in nice. You're gonna have a little bit of cramping at first, especially if you have more of a prominent styloid or anything like that on the lateral side, if you want Taylor's bunion, things like that. They're gonna break in, you know, a little bit slower, but just for a standard, you know, 2E foot. If you wanna go true to size, get, you know, more of that weight reduction, more of a performance fit, I think you break them in, I did. And then in terms of a 4E, I probably would be going up at least 1/2 size. And if you've got a really prominent outside foot, go up 1 size. Because the lockdown is so good, and if you're a 2E, like I said, you can go up a 1/2 size and then it's fine. A 4, you can go up because, like I said, the lockdown's okay. Just remember, when you first put them on, they're gonna feel pretty darn floppy if you're going up halves and full sizes. You're definitely gonna wanna either wear 2 pairs of socks, a thicker pair of socks, until, like I said, until the shoe breaks in a little bit and you can really start cranking them down. And in terms of the snake bitten foot, whether on their own or with an orthotic, because it's pretty simple to get an orthotic, and the lockdown is really good. Really for heel pain, arch pain especially, ball of foot pain, these things are absolutely tremendous, especially if you've got arthritis, you know, in the forefoot. I think honestly, once they break in more and more, they're gonna start to feel even more buttery in that forefoot, more protective. Because the uppers break in really nicely around them, you know, like I said, you can fit an orthotic in there and it's not gonna jam in the shoe as much as maybe some other shoes with a little more low volume in there. However, on their own, you know, Way of Weight and Leaning's thermoplastics, they really have that nice mixture of, number one, a bouncy feeling, but they don't impart a ton of shock up your leg. I know me with my jumper's knee on these things. These ones, there have been a few others recently that I've noticed. Some, I don't even feel it. Others, you can really feel that shock on up your leg. These ones really did kind of insulate my foot. So I think if you're an ankle sprainer, take it easy for a little bit. Once they break in and you kind of sink into the shoe a little bit and kind of get that lockdown, then I think they're fine because of the flange on these things, like I said, because of the surface area over here. It's just that when you first get them on, the confidence might not necessarily be there, and like I said, until you break that lace line in. But really, in terms of any snake bites on your foot, especially someone suffering from shin splints, potentially needs a little bit of extra help, you know, just taking some pressure off that anterior leg, these ones are, yeah, really tremendous. And getting into the all-important performance and playability of the 11s, you know, I'll say this, the 10s, a little bit more rugged container type shoes, whereas the 11s, much more of a nimble, easy to move around shoe. The 11s get to that place in terms of stability. I know I'm like a broken record, but once they break in, but they're just a lot easier to get around on the court versus the 10s. Whereas the 10s had all the tools that the 11s do, right? You know, that it has the thermoplastics, has the carbon fiber, everything like that. It's just that the 11s, like I said, for their weight, their profile, just feel like there's nothing under your foot. I mean, it just feels like, it's crazy how bottom light these shoes feel, but how stable they also feel. For somebody trying to get up for rebounds over and over again, someone trying to beat a defender to the rim, you know, just trying to attack someone with speed versus side-to-side stability and side-to-side quickness. Really, it does all of them very, very well. Like I said, you just gotta break them in a little bit. I put it this way, it's almost like the Way of Wade 10 and the 8083 Ultra V2 had a kid. That's this shoe, right? It's got the easy flowing freedom of movement that the 808 line has. These are definitely, you know, like the pinnacle of the Way of Wade performance line, right? Versus, you know, on the All City line where, yeah, they might be a little bit more side-to-side stable and side-to-side rigid, I would say. But these ones, the flange is so long on them. You sink into the shoe so well. That medial column, right, like the ball of your foot and a little bit up, is just cradled so well that you feel like you have such a command of these shoes. I think that's what I'm trying to get across is that your foot feels like it's commanding the shoe, not necessarily the shoe just providing this rigid container for your foot. And I think that's the best part of these shoes. And I think as I've been taking, you know, more and more basketball lessons and doing more and more with that, I've been noticing that, you know, when I'm trying to accomplish like a certain skill, right? Because I'm trying to develop certain skills when I'm doing these lessons. And I noticed I'm trying to do like more hesitation through the legs, right? And then exploding. I felt like, you know, I was actually, you know, controlling the shoe. Like I could actually do something with my medial column on the shoe versus some other shoes where, right, it's just like a rigid beam under your foot or just a soft, you know, pillowy, you know, cloud under your foot. Whereas in these ones, like I said, you really do have command of them. And I think that's the main point of the shoe I want to get across. So love to hear your thoughts, especially if you're going for these. And if you do want to see what I'm talking about with the Way of Wade 8083 Ultra V2 and kind of what those shoes look like and why I think these ones are kind of in line with those, except with the trappings of the 10, then make sure you click into this video up above and subscribe down below. Respect your rubber and foam. I'll see you somewhere in the Sneakerverse.